That was a very deep dent that I was playing with. This one is questionable because this was a really deep. That dent was about this big around, and it was, I mean, it was like this. So this one probably won't move all the way up.
Yeah.
It might. I'm just having to work it a little bit at a time. I don't want it to get too hot where it burns the paint. But it is starting to. You see how I'm looking between the cavity in there? A little too hot to the touch at this point. So the way it works, and I know the units look the same between the steel and the aluminum, other than the head on it, but they're actually very, very different units. Obviously, the metal one, the steel one, is an electromagnetic heat induction, which obviously doesn't work with aluminum because it's non-ferrous. This is strictly a heat induction, and the head is very different. It's also a lot heavier. It works in basically a similar fashion, where you do use the hot box basically backwards of what conventional pushing is, because that metal is going to warp. So you kind of have to work it from the outside in and get that metal to shrink up. You know. It's getting real close. It's also getting real hot. So that one's not near as bad as that was. So let's see, as far as actually repairing that. So a lot of times, it's weird, it's so funny on the aluminum, and very rarely you'll ever do this on the steel. But if you go directly over the top of the dent, and you hit it just like I did, and I kind of did it on purpose so you saw it, it actually sunk down.
Oh, really?
Because of the dent.
Yeah.
It basically what it does is when you heat it, it continues to try to pull down. So what we do is we kind of walk in from the outside with it, get it where it starts to raise. And I'm walking that raise right in there into the depth. Now it's going to shrink back down and settle as it cools. So typically what I'll do is I'll let it cool down for a minute and let it shrink back down after it builds that high up. Let it kind of settle, see what it leaves me. It's probably still going to be a little shallow, so I'll do it again, and at that point, I'll be able to go in there and just tap it down regularly and be able to smooth it out. The advantage to a dent like this, and this is what you have to be careful with on white, and again, I kind of did it on purpose so you can see it, at just the right angle, because I hit it a couple of times in a row too quickly. Just at the right angle, you can see a little bit of a yellowish haze to it. Yeah. That's because I was heating it up too much. Okay, so that's the fact that these work so well on a painted surface doesn't mean you can't burn the paint if you do something foolish, for lack of a better term, in the way you're using it. Because the settings are set up where you can control strictly the power, which is then on an infinity loop. So as long as I hold the button down, it's going to give me these different power amounts. 20%, 40%, 60%, all the way up to 100. So I can literally crank this over to 100, and it's just going to continue to burn. And at a point here in a second, if it didn't already do it, it would start smoking. There it goes, starting to smoke. And paint burn right about there. And starting to burn the paint right there in the middle. But you also see there it is. There's the paint burn. I mean, it'll completely blister the paint if I continue to go. And you can see how much it dropped and shrank that metal down. So the way we normally use it is, this again is infinity. Yeah. So it's going to do the same thing that I just did, but then you have time bursts. So you've got a half second, 1 second, 1.5, and a 2. Those are 100% power, but just in controlled bursts. So see it just pop back up. Mm-hmm. It's so like at the half, that's where I use mine, is a half-second burst. So I can sit here and hold this half second, that's it. It doesn't matter how long I hold that button, it's not doing anything until I let go of it and then push it again. Mm-hmm. Now, can I be stupid and just sit there and keep tapping that button and it still end up doing that? Absolutely. Because it will continue to fire off those half-second bursts every time I hit the button. But the great thing about what I did with this one is that was, and I'll do another one to show you, but that dent was about this big around and about this deep. So I've brought it up to that. Now, for a hot box, that's still a little deep on a small dent to really get it to move up nice and smooth. But that dent was oil canned. Okay? Now it's at a point that we can go underneath there and push it, tap it back down, and we've got no problems with it. So I'll make another big one over here so you can see. Basically, let me see if I might be able to do it with this. Yeah, but let me see. Let me see if it'll work with this. So you see how flexy that is? Yeah. Okay. Let's just see if it'll work. So basically, let's say that's fully oil canned, okay? Yeah. Because it's just so soft. If I needed to tap down right here, I'm not gonna do very well at tapping down. But I'm gonna come around the outside of it and draw that metal up. You can even hear the difference in the rigidity. So it's still got a little bit of flexibility, but that kind of gives you an idea of what it'll do in an oil can situation. So that, if we just go up underneath there and crank on that with a rod, not really familiar with how to work aluminum, and just crank on it, that dent's gonna buckle up. You over push it or push it too fast. Yeah. And that can happen to a seasoned tech, you know, let alone, you know, a new technician. So I'm gonna go in here. And I'm gonna start walking this dent. And this one's being a little tricky on me. There we go. Sometimes you just got to find that little sweet spot. So I've got it shrunk up now. I'm gonna let it cool back down a little bit and let it settle and see what it gives us. Then I'm gonna go in there and I'm gonna kind of ease it back up again. There's no question that that dent would have easily oil canned if we weren't careful with it. Yeah. You know, and just by bringing it up, you see how much smaller and how much easier of a dent it is now to work. You know, where I can get a small whale tail to that and be able to push it right up with no problem. Now the steel one. Now, before I say that, the thing about these, I typically don't use them just to finish off small dents, because a small dent, you know, to me, I'm going to push it faster than I'm going to hit it with a hot box. You know, so if it's that small, there's no reason to hot box it. Yeah. But like I said, we can definitely minimize a dent to make it much easier to push. Also, the steel one does a really, in my opinion, it does a little bit better of a job for actually finishing off dents. But that's just the inherent properties of steel. It just, let's face it, it flexes better and it moves better than aluminum does, and that's steel. But you know, the most important thing about an aluminum hot box, I feel, when I use mine the most, is if I've got a hood or a roof, or even a lot of times a quarter panel that's just got a couple of monster shots that if I can save that and stabilize it and tighten it back up with this where I don't have to replace the panel, it's just, you know, more money in my pocket. So, you know, there's been many a times that I've worked a roof on something and I've grabbed my steel hot box. I've been working a roof on something that's got some big old nasty shots in it, especially some of that hail we have in Texas. Got some big nasty shots like this that's got to go to the body shop. They're going to skin the roof, paint it, and put it, you know, replace it. I've saved the panel by using the hot box to tighten it up.
So it doesn't matter where it hits on the backside, if it's on a support area or a brace?
The brace underneath doesn't matter. The only thing that can do, and I'm hitting that pretty hard, so that's the reason why it's yellowing on us, but the only thing that a brace will do is it can affect it coming up a little bit depending on the glue. So certain manufacturers like the Mercedes and some of the Dodges have some significantly really hard glue. It can affect the way it moves because that glue is trying to hold it down to the brace. Okay, so that can. Other than that, no, it won't affect it. Okay. I mean, you can use this anywhere, and that's you know, there's another one on the market called a Power PDR, Power Pro PDR. Whatever, it's the orange one. That is actually, and I have a variation of it at home in my shop. That is actually a carbon rod unit that you arc from the, it's basically, it works like a welder, only it doesn't lay a bead down. It uses a carbon rod where it arcs to it. And the arc is what that is causing that metal to move because it's heating it up from the arc. The problem with that one is A, you can't use it inside of braces, and it does work. Don't get me wrong, it does work very well.